Throughout history, periods of social and political turmoil often reveal a disquieting pattern: the relentless search for a designated adversary, be it a dictator, a political party, or an abstract ideology. This scapegoat becomes a palpable evil to be confronted, a clear target for collective animosity. Yet, a far more insidious and pervasive force frequently operates, not in the shadowy corridors of power, but within the minds of ordinary citizens. Theologian and philosopher Dietrich Bonhoeffer identified this phenomenon as stupidity, a concept he defined not as intellectual deficiency or common foolishness. According to Bonhoeffer, this specific form of stupidity is a profound psychological and social condition where individuals abdicate their critical autonomy, passively accepting collective narratives without conscious scrutiny. It's a voluntary blindness that renders people not merely manipulable, but more alarmingly, dangerously convinced of their own righteousness. This conviction, Bonhoeffer argued, makes such stupidity more hazardous than deliberate malice. An evil individual, at some level, acknowledges their transgression. The stupid person, conversely, believes they are acting for good, driven by enthusiasm, moral conviction, and a perceived sense of duty. This makes their actions incredibly difficult to counteract. Appeals to logic, common sense, or rational debate fall on deaf ears when conscience has been outsourced to prevailing zeitgeist. As Bonhoeffer lamented for his prison cell, against stupidity, there is no defense. Neither protest nor violence can reach it. Reason is of no use. This stupidity isn't an issue of IQ, but a surrendered moral compass, often cultivated by environmental factors, social architectures, and immense collective pressure. In times of crisis or oppression, it can spread like a contagion, infecting even the most educated, religious, and socially esteemed individuals. People who might, in stable times, reject certain notions become their fervent champions, no longer thinking as individuals, but as extensions of an ideological framework that has ensnared them. Echoing this unsettling diagnosis, Carl Gustav Jung, in The Undiscovered Self, highlighted the true catastrophe of modern civilization: the dissolution of the individual into the anonymous mass. Jung argued that scientific rationality, technological advancements, and the bureaucratization of life forge individuals who are adapted and functional, yet profoundly alienated from their own psyche. They cease to think for themselves, instead reproducing prescribed thoughts. They no longer feel authentically, but react as expected. Jung termed this collective possession. A psychic state where the individual's unconscious is overwhelmed by the shadow of the collective unconscious. The outcome is a novel form of servitude, where individuals believe themselves free while being entirely governed by values they never consciously adopted. Bonhoeffer's insights, forged in the crucible of Nazi Germany, revealed how the societal stupidity provides fertile ground for totalitarianism. The regime didn't necessarily need to convert people through intricate ideology. It merely had to co-opt their sense of belonging and inundate them with simplistic certainties. It didn't demand malevolent masterminds at every echelon, but rather compliant participants who ceased to question. Thus, even intelligent and morally upright people became complicit in atrocities, not because they were inherently evil, but because they were possessed by this pervasive stupidity. Bonhoeffer chillingly observed that in conversing with such an individual, one often feels they are not engaging with a person at all, but with a collection of slogans and catchphrases that have taken root. This depersonalization is the intended outcome of systems thriving on conformity, turning individuals into echo chambers, incapable of independent moral judgment. The unsettling observations of Bonhoeffer and Jung found empirical backing in 20th century experimental psychology. Stanley Milgram's 1961 obedience experiments at Yale, for instance, starkly revealed how readily ordinary individuals would inflict pain on others under orders from an authority figure. Over 60% of participants administered potentially lethal shocks, not from sadism, but because a scientist in a lab coat calmly instructed them to please continue. Their personal conscience was muted by the assumption that a higher authority understood the necessity. Similarly, Solomon Asch's conformity experiments in the 1950s demonstrated that individuals would often deny the clear evidence of their senses to align with deliberately erroneous group consensus, simply to avoid the discomfort of dissent. These studies underscore what Jung called collective possession and Bonhoeffer identified as surrendered reason. When truth is sacrificed for social harmony, when critical thought is supplanted by slogans, and when the fear of ostracism outweighs the imperative to be free, individuals can become unwitting agents of detrimental forces, not by malicious intent, but by passive convenience. This leads to a critical question. Why do individuals, clearly capable of thought, choose not to engage it? The answer often lies in how society itself rewards this functional stupidity. Social scientists term one such mechanism strategic ignorance, an active refusal of knowledge when it threatens personal comfort, belonging, or emotional stability. In systems demanding productivity and predictability, questioning and critical thinking can be implicitly punished. It is often far easier to conform, repeat dominant narratives, and perform public virtues without genuine introspection. Consequently, the voluntary abdication of consciousness is not only tolerated, but, in many contexts, subtly promoted. Large organizations may implement questionable policies with the silent consent of teams who know better but fear being labeled problematic. Social media often amplifies shallow, polarized discourse while deeper reflections are ignored. The path to resisting the psychic erosion, as both Bonhoeffer and Jung suggested, is not through mass movements or systemic overhauls alone, but through the arduous, internal awakening of individual consciousness. For Bonhoeffer, this was embodied in costly grace, a faith demanding the courage to act responsibly before a higher moral imperative, even at the cost of isolation or persecution. It meant refusing to live on autopilot. Jung, in turn, described this as individuation, a profound journey of integrating one's internal opposites, shadow, ego, persona, to achieve wholeness and authenticity. Both thinkers recognize that true freedom requires confronting one's own capacity for conformity and self-deception. This restoration of individuality begins with the courage to doubt, to question, and to listen to one's inner voice over the din of the crowd. It means choosing conscience over convenience and authenticity over acceptance. In a world that often pushes us toward consumption, noise, and superficiality, cultivating independent thought is a radical act. We do not live in less perilous times, but perhaps more sophisticated ones. Stupidity, in Bonhoeffer's sense, may no longer always wear military uniforms. It can be cloaked in academic gowns, corporate suits, or the ephemeral glow of social media validation.